The scorching Texas sun beat down mercilessly on the dusty streets of Harrington as the stagecoach rolled to a stop outside the town's modest hotel. From within the weathered vehicle emerged a tall, impeccably dressed gentleman whose polished boots seemed untouched by the journey's dust. Dr. Edward Wainwright adjusted his black top hat and surveyed the small frontier town with calculating eyes that gleamed like dark amber in the afternoon light. "Welcome to Harrington, Doctor," called out Mayor Samuel Hutchins, hurrying across the street with his characteristic limp from an old cattle accident. His weathered face bore the permanent squint of a man who'd spent decades under the unforgiving Texas sun. "We're mighty grateful you've chosen our humble town for your practice." Dr. Wainwright's smile was pristine, too pristine for a man who'd supposedly traveled from the East Coast. His teeth were unnaturally white and perfectly aligned, creating an almost unsettling contrast against his pale complexion. "The pleasure is entirely mine, Mayor Hutchins. I've heard wonderful things about Harrington's potential." The way he emphasized the word potential sent an inexplicable chill down the mayor's spine, despite the oppressive heat. Around them, curious townspeople had begun to gather, drawn by the spectacle of a stranger, so obviously refined, arriving in their simple cattle town. Women in faded calico dresses whispered behind their hands, while men in worn denim and dusty boots eyed the newcomer with a mixture of suspicion and curiosity. "Dr. Wainwright comes highly recommended from Philadelphia," Mayor Hutchins announced to the growing crowd. "He's here to establish a proper dental practice, something we've sorely needed since old Doc Peterson passed last winter." Mrs. Eleanor Blackwood, the town's most prominent socialite and wife of the largest ranch owner, stepped forward with practiced grace. Her burgundy dress, though showing signs of the frontier's harsh conditions, still maintained an air of sophistication that set her apart from the other women. "Doctor, we simply must have you for dinner tomorrow evening. The whole town is eager to meet you properly." "How delightfully civilized," Dr. Wainwright replied, his voice carrying a peculiar accent that seemed to shift between regions. "I do so appreciate proper hospitality." As the crowd dispersed and arrangements were made for the doctor's luggage, young Timothy Fletcher, the blacksmith's 12-year-old son, tugged at his father's leather apron. "Pa, did you see his teeth? They looked wrong somehow." "Oh, hush now, boy," his father, Marcus Fletcher, muttered while wiping sweat from his brow with a grimy cloth. "Don't go spreading foolish talk about the new doctor. Town needs a dentist, and we're lucky to get one." But Timothy wasn't the only one who'd noticed something unsettling about Dr. Wainwright's appearance. From across the street, Abigail Turner lowered her small notebook and pencil, her keen journalist's instincts already prickling with curiosity. At 23, she was one of the few unmarried women in Harrington who worked for a living, writing for the local newspaper and occasionally sending stories to larger papers in Dallas and Houston. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a practical bun, and her simple blue dress bore the ink stains that marked her profession. Unlike the other women who'd gathered to gawk at the newcomer, Abigail had been studying him with the analytical eye of someone trained to notice details others might miss. There was something about the way Dr. Wainwright moved, too fluid, too controlled, as if every gesture had been carefully rehearsed. His clothes, while expensive, seemed oddly timeless, lacking the specific fashionable details that would place them in any particular year or region. And those teeth, Timothy was right, they were unsettling in their perfection. "Abigail, dear, you're staring," came the gentle voice of her landlady, Mrs. Rose Patterson, a kindly widow who rented rooms above her general store. "It's not polite to gawk at newcomers like they're circus attractions." "I'm not gawking, Mrs. Patterson. I'm observing," Abigail replied, still watching as Dr. Wainwright supervised the unloading of several large, mysterious crates from the stagecoach. "There's a difference. Well, observe all you like, but remember, this town could use some good news in the paper for once, instead of all those stories about cattle rustlers and drought." As the afternoon wore on, Dr. Wainwright made his way to the building that would serve as his dental practice, a two-story structure on Main Street that had stood empty since the previous tenant, a failed haberdashery, had closed 6 months earlier. The building's windows were boarded up, and weeds had begun to grow around its foundation, giving it an abandoned, almost haunted appearance. Several townspeople offered to help the doctor move his equipment, but he politely declined, insisting that his instruments were too delicate and valuable to risk damage. Instead, he hired a few local men to simply carry the crates inside, warning them repeatedly to handle everything with extreme care. "Heavy as coffins," muttered Jake Morrison, one of the hired hands, as he struggled with a particularly large crate. "What's he got in here, anvils?" His companion, Pete Daniels, wiped sweat from his forehead and glanced nervously at the boarded windows. "Don't know, but I'll be glad when we're done. This place gives me the shivers." As evening approached and the last of the crates disappeared into the building, Dr. Wainwright emerged onto the street, his appearance still immaculate despite the day's work. He surveyed the town with those unsettling amber eyes, his perfect smile never wavering. "Gentlemen, thank you for your assistance," he said, pressing a silver coin into each man's palm, payment far more generous than they'd expected. "I trust you'll spread word that Dr. Wainwright's practice will be opening soon. I have such wonderful plans for this community." That night, as Harrington settled into its usual quiet routine, strange sounds began to emanate from the doctor's building. The rhythmic grinding of metal on metal echoed through the still air, accompanied by what sounded like muffled hammering. Several residents, including the Fletcher family who lived nearby, found their sleep disturbed by the unusual noises. "Probably just setting up his equipment," Marcus Fletcher told his wife when she complained about the racket. "Dentist tools and such. It'll quiet down once he's settled." But Timothy, lying awake in his small bed, wasn't so sure. The sounds didn't seem like normal construction or arrangement. They were too rhythmic, too deliberate, almost like some kind of ritual, and occasionally, carried on the hot night breeze, he could swear he heard something else, a low, melodic humming that seemed to come from deep within the building. As the clock in the town square chimed midnight, the sounds finally ceased, leaving Harrington in a silence that felt heavier and more oppressive than usual. In her room above the general store, Abigail Turner sat by her window, notebook in hand, recording every detail she'd observed about the mysterious Dr. Wainwright. Something about the man didn't sit right with her, and her instincts as a journalist had rarely led her astray. Tomorrow, she decided, she would begin her own investigation into the background of Harrington's new dentist. After all, a good story was worth pursuing, and Dr. Edward Wainwright was certainly going to make for an interesting story. What she couldn't know, as she finally closed her notebook and prepared for bed, was that her investigation would uncover horrors beyond anything her rational mind could have imagined, and that some stories were better left untold. 3 weeks after Dr. Wainwright's arrival, his dental practice had become the talk of Harrington. The boarded windows had been replaced with pristine glass, and an elegant wooden sign bearing his name in gold lettering now hung above the entrance. The building itself seemed transformed. What had once appeared abandoned and foreboding now looked welcoming and professional. Mrs. Eleanor Blackwood emerged from the practice on a sweltering Tuesday morning, her hand pressed delicately to her jaw. The other ladies of the town's social circle had gathered outside, eager to hear about her experience with the new dentist. "Oh, my dears," she said, her voice carrying an odd, dreamy quality. "Dr. Wainwright is simply miraculous. The pain I've endured for months, completely gone. And look," she smiled widely, revealing teeth that were impossibly white and perfectly straight. The gathered women gasped in admiration. Mrs. Blackwood's teeth had always been somewhat crooked, yellowed by years of coffee and the harsh frontier life. Now they gleamed like polished ivory, each one identical in size and shape. "Eleanor, you look 20 years younger," exclaimed Mrs. Martha Hendricks, the banker's wife. "How did he manage such a transformation in just one appointment?" "His methods are quite advanced," Mrs. Blackwood replied, though her eyes seemed strangely unfocused. "Revolutionary techniques from the East. I can hardly remember the procedure itself. Dr. Wainwright uses a special gas that makes everything so peaceful and dreamlike." From across the street, Abigail Turner watched the exchange with growing unease. She'd been documenting the changes in Dr. Wainwright's patients for her investigation, and what she'd observed troubled her deeply. Each person who visited the practice emerged with the same unnaturally perfect smile and that same distant, dreamy expression. "Miss Turner," called out Dr. Wainwright's voice from behind her. She turned to find the dentist approaching, his own perfect smile gleaming in the morning sun. "I don't believe I've had the pleasure of a formal introduction. I'm Dr. Edward Wainwright." "Abigail Turner," she replied, studying his face carefully. "I write for the Harrington Herald." "Ah, a journalist. How delightful. I do hope you'll consider writing about my practice. I'm quite proud of the results I've been achieving." His amber eyes seemed to bore into hers with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. "I've certainly noticed the dramatic improvements in your patients," Abigail said carefully. "Your techniques must be quite advanced indeed." "Oh, they are. Quite advanced." His smile widened, and for a moment Abigail could have sworn she saw something metallic glinting behind his perfect teeth. "Perhaps you'd like to schedule an appointment yourself. I notice you have a slight irregularity in your lower incisors that I could easily correct." The suggestion sent a chill down Abigail's spine. Her teeth were perfectly healthy, and the irregularity he mentioned was so minor that no one had ever commented on it before. How had he noticed such a small detail from a casual conversation? "Thank you, but I'm quite satisfied with my current dental health," she replied firmly. Of course, but should you change your mind, my door is always open." Dr. Wainwright tipped his hat and continued down the street, leaving Abigail with the distinct feeling that she'd just been threatened. That afternoon, young Timothy Fletcher burst into his father's blacksmith shop, his face pale with fear. "Pa, you've got to come quick. Something's wrong with Mrs. Blackwood." Marcus Fletcher set down his hammer and followed his son outside, where a small crowd had gathered around the Blackwood carriage. Mrs. Blackwood sat rigidly upright in the driver's seat, her reins slack in her hands, staring straight ahead with that same dreamy expression she'd worn earlier. "Eleanor," called out Mayor Hutchins, approaching the carriage cautiously. "Eleanor, are you all right?" She turned toward him slowly, as if moving through thick molasses, and smiled that perfect, unsettling smile. "Of course, Samuel. Why wouldn't I be all right?" Her voice was flat, emotionless, completely unlike her usual animated manner of speaking. "You've been sitting here for near an hour," said Dr. James Morrison, the town's only remaining physician. "People were getting worried." "Have I?" Mrs. Blackwood blinked slowly, confusion flickering across her features. I was going to the mercantile to buy. She trailed off, her brow furrowing as if she couldn't remember what she'd intended to purchase. Dr. Morrison stepped closer, his medical instincts alert. "Eleanor, look at me. Follow my finger with your eyes." He moved his index finger back and forth in front of her face, but her gaze remained fixed and unfocused. "I'm perfectly fine," she insisted, though her voice lacked conviction. "Dr. Wainwright said I might feel a bit different for a few days. It's perfectly normal." The crowd exchanged worried glances. This wasn't the Eleanor Blackwood they knew, the sharp-tongued, quick-witted woman who ran the town's largest ranch with an iron fist. This person seemed like a hollow shell wearing Eleanor's face. "Perhaps you should go home and rest," Dr. Morrison suggested gently. "I'll have someone drive you." "No need," Mrs. Blackwood replied, suddenly snapping the reins with mechanical precision. "I can manage perfectly well." The carriage lurched forward, and she drove away with the same rigid, unnatural posture. That evening, Abigail sat in her room, writing furiously in her notebook. The incident with Mrs. Blackwood had confirmed her worst suspicions about Dr. Wainwright. Something was terribly wrong with his practice, and she was determined to uncover the truth. A soft knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she called, expecting Mrs. Patterson with her evening tea. Instead, Timothy Fletcher peered around the door, his young face etched with worry. "Miss Turner, I'm sorry to bother you, but I need to tell someone what I saw, and Pa won't listen." "What is it, Timothy?" Abigail set down her pen and gave the boy her full attention. "It's about Dr. Wainwright's place," Timothy said, glancing nervously over his shoulder. "I was walking past real late last night, and I saw lights in the windows, but not normal lights. They were green and flickering like fire, but cold fire." Abigail felt her pulse quicken. "Go on." "And I heard sounds, Miss Turner. Terrible sounds, like metal scraping against bone and laughing. But not happy laughing, mean laughing, like someone enjoying hurting something." Timothy's voice dropped to a whisper, "And I swear I heard screaming, but it was muffled, like it was coming from underground." "Did you tell anyone else about this?" Timothy shook his head. "Pa says I'm just letting my imagination run wild. Says Dr. Wainwright is a respectable man and I shouldn't spread tales. But Miss Turner, I know what I saw and heard." Abigail reached out and placed a reassuring hand on the boy's shoulder. "I believe you, Timothy, and I think you're very brave for telling me. What are we going to do?" he asked, his eyes wide with fear and hope. "We're going to find out exactly what Dr. Wainwright is really doing in that building," Abigail replied, her journalist's determination overriding her fear. "But we have to be very careful. If he's as dangerous as I suspect, we can't let him know we're investigating." As Timothy left, Abigail returned to her notebook, adding his testimony to her growing collection of evidence. Outside her window, the lights of Harrington flickered and dimmed as the town settled into sleep. But in the distance, she could see a faint green glow emanating from the windows of Dr. Wainwright's practice. Whatever was happening in that building, she was going to expose it. The people of Harrington deserved to know the truth about their new dentist, no matter how horrifying that truth might be. But as she watched that eerie green light pulse rhythmically in the darkness, Abigail couldn't shake the feeling that she was about to uncover something far more sinister than simple medical malpractice. Something that would challenge everything she thought she knew about the natural world. The following morning brought news that sent shockwaves through Harrington. Mrs. Eleanor Blackwood had been found by her ranch hands, standing motionless in her parlor, staring at the wall with that same vacant expression. She had apparently been standing there all night, never moving, never speaking, just waiting. Dr. Morrison had been summoned immediately, but his examination revealed nothing physically wrong with her. Her pulse was steady, her breathing normal, yet she seemed trapped in some kind of waking trance. When questioned, she could only repeat in that flat, emotionless voice that Dr. Wainwright had given her perfect teeth and that she felt wonderfully improved. Abigail arrived at the Blackwood Ranch within hours of hearing the news, her notebook and pencil ready. She found Dr. Morrison on the front porch, his weathered face creased with worry and confusion. "Doctor, what's your professional opinion about Mrs. Blackwood's condition?" she asked, settling beside him on the wooden steps. Dr. Morrison removed his spectacles and cleaned them slowly, a gesture Abigail recognized as his way of buying time when faced with something he couldn't explain. "In 30 years of practicing medicine, Miss Turner, I've never seen anything like this. She's physically healthy, better than healthy actually. Her color is good, her vital signs are perfect. Even that chronic back pain she's complained about for years seems to have vanished. But she's not herself. It's as if someone has taken Eleanor Blackwood and replaced her with a very convincing imitation." He replaced his spectacles and looked toward the house. "Her husband is beside himself, says she doesn't recognize their private jokes, doesn't remember conversations they had just days ago. She knows facts about her life, but the emotions, the personality, it's all gone. Abigail scribbled notes rapidly. "Have you spoken with Dr. Wainwright about this?" "I tried. He was very polite, very professional, insisted that some patients experience temporary disorientation after his procedures, but that it always resolves within a few days." Dr. Morrison's voice carried a note of skepticism. "He showed me testimonials from patients in other towns, all praising his revolutionary techniques." "Other towns?" Abigail's head snapped up. "He's practiced elsewhere?" "According to him, yes. Philadelphia, Baltimore, Richmond, always moving to bring his advanced methods to underserved communities." Dr. Morrison stood and brushed dust from his coat. "I've sent telegrams to colleagues in those cities, asking about Dr. Wainwright's reputation. Haven't heard back yet." That afternoon, Abigail made her way to the telegraph office, where she found the operator, Mr. Henry Walsh, looking troubled as he sorted through incoming messages. "Afternoon, Miss Turner," he said, glancing up from his work. "If you're here about those telegrams Dr. Morrison sent, I'm afraid the news isn't good." "What do you mean?" Mr. Walsh handed her a stack of telegraph forms. Responses from Philadelphia, Baltimore, and Richmond, all saying the same thing: no record of any Dr. Edward Wainwright practicing dentistry in their cities, ever. Abigail felt her blood run cold as she read through the messages. Each one was brief and to the point. No Dr. Edward Wainwright licensed to practice dentistry in this city. No record of such individual in medical directories. Please verify information. "There's more," Mr. Walsh continued, lowering his voice. "I took the liberty of sending inquiries to dental colleges in the East. None of them have any record of graduating a student by that name." "So he's a fraud," Abigail murmured, her mind racing with the implications. "Appears so. Question is, what kind of fraud, and what's he really doing to those patients?" That evening, Abigail met secretly with Timothy Fletcher behind his father's blacksmith shop. The boy had been keeping watch on Dr. Wainwright's building, and his reports were becoming increasingly disturbing. "He's been getting deliveries," Timothy whispered, glancing around nervously. "Strange deliveries late at night. Wooden crates, like the ones he brought when he first arrived, but smaller, and they smell wrong." "Wrong how?" "Like the slaughterhouse, but worse. Sweet and rotten at the same time." Timothy shuddered. "And yesterday, I saw him talking to Jake Morrison. You know, one of the men who helped move his equipment. Jake looked just like Mrs. Blackwood does now. All empty and strange." Abigail's heart sank. Jake Morrison had been one of Dr. Wainwright's recent patients seeking treatment for a painful tooth. "Timothy, I need you to do something very important, but also very dangerous. Can you be brave?" The boy nodded solemnly. "I need you to watch Dr. Wainwright's building tonight, from a safe distance where he can't see you. I want to know exactly what happens after dark." "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to pay a visit to some of his other patients. See if they're all experiencing the same changes." Abigail spent the evening visiting the homes of Dr. Wainwright's patients, and what she discovered chilled her to the bone. Every single person who had visited his practice displayed the same symptoms: perfect teeth, vacant expressions, and a complete loss of personality and emotional depth. Mrs. Sarah Jenkins, who had once been known for her infectious laughter and quick wit, now spoke in monotone responses and couldn't remember her own children's birthdays. Tom Bradley, the jovial saloon keeper, served drinks with mechanical precision, but showed no recognition of customers he'd known for years. Most disturbing of all was little Mary Patterson, Mrs. Patterson's 8-year-old granddaughter, who had visited Dr. Wainwright for a routine cleaning. The child now sat motionless for hours, staring at nothing, her once bright eyes dull and lifeless. She was such a spirited child. Mrs. Patterson wept as they watched Mary sit rigidly in her chair, not responding to her grandmother's attempts at conversation. Always running, always laughing. Now she barely speaks, barely moves. What has that man done to her? As midnight approached, Abigail made her way to the predetermined meeting spot behind the blacksmith shop. Timothy was already there, his face pale in the moonlight. "Miss Turner," he whispered urgently, "you're not going to believe what I saw. Tell me everything." Around 11 o'clock, Dr. Wainwright came out of his building carrying something wrapped in cloth, something about the size of a person, but it wasn't moving right. It was too stiff, too straight. Timothy's voice shook. He loaded it into a wagon and drove out toward the old cemetery. The cemetery. That's not all. About an hour later, he came back with the wagon empty. But Miss Turner, when he got out, he was different. Different how? His clothes were dirty, like he'd been digging, and his hands... Timothy swallowed hard. His hands were covered in something dark, something that looked like blood. Abigail felt a chill run down her spine. "Timothy, I want you to go home now. Lock your doors and don't come out until morning. And whatever you do, don't let Dr. Wainwright know you've been watching him." "What about you? What are you going to do?" Abigail looked toward the distant glow of Dr. Wainwright's practice, her resolve hardening. "I'm going to find out exactly what he's hiding in that building, and then I'm going to stop him." As Timothy hurried home, Abigail remained in the shadows, watching the eerie green light pulse from Dr. Wainwright's windows. Whatever was happening in Harrington, it was far worse than simple medical fraud. People were disappearing, personalities were being erased, and now it seemed that bodies were being disposed of in the dead of night. The truth was more horrifying than she had imagined, but she was determined to expose it. The people of Harrington were counting on her, even if they didn't know it yet, and she would not let them down, no matter what horrors awaited her in the darkness of Dr. Wainwright's practice. The next night, under the cover of a moonless sky, Abigail crept through the shadows toward Dr. Wainwright's building. She had spent the day gathering supplies, a small crowbar, matches, and a lantern, and had left detailed notes about her investigation hidden in her room, just in case something happened to her. The building loomed before her, its windows glowing with that sickly green light. As she approached the rear entrance, she could hear the now familiar sounds Timothy had described: rhythmic scraping, mechanical grinding, and underneath it all, a low humming that seemed to vibrate through the very walls. The back door was locked, but the crowbar made quick work of the simple mechanism. Abigail slipped inside, her heart pounding so loudly she was certain it would give her away. The interior was darker than she had expected, lit only by that eerie green glow emanating from somewhere deeper in the building. She found herself in what appeared to be a normal dental office: chairs, instruments, cabinets filled with bottles and tools. But as her eyes adjusted to the dim light, she began to notice disturbing details. The instruments were far too large and crude for delicate dental work. Some appeared to be modified surgical tools, while others looked like nothing she had ever seen before. The green light was coming from a doorway at the far end of the room, partially concealed behind a heavy curtain. As Abigail approached, the humming grew louder, and she could make out other sounds, bubbling like liquid boiling, and a rhythmic clicking that reminded her of a telegraph key. She pushed aside the curtain and gasped. The room beyond was a nightmare fusion of dental office and mad scientist's laboratory. Along one wall stood a row of dental chairs, but these had been modified with leather restraints and strange mechanical devices. Tubes and wires connected each chair to a massive apparatus in the center of the room. A bizarre contraption of brass gears, glass vessels, and pulsing green tubes filled with a luminescent fluid. But it was the occupants of the chairs that made Abigail's blood freeze. 7 people sat motionless in the chairs, their heads tilted back, mouths held open by metal devices. Tubes ran from their mouths to the central apparatus, and their eyes stared sightlessly at the ceiling. She recognized them all: Mrs. Blackwood, Jake Morrison, Tom Bradley, little Mary Patterson, and 3 others who had recently visited Dr. Wainwright's practice. They were alive. She could see their chests rising and falling, but they seemed completely unaware of their surroundings. The green fluid pulsed through the tubes, connected to their mouths, and with each pulse, their bodies twitched slightly, as if receiving some kind of electrical shock. "Magnificent, isn't it?" came Dr. Wainwright's voice from behind her. Abigail spun around to find the dentist standing in the doorway, his perfect smile gleaming in the green light. But now she could see what she had missed before. His teeth weren't just perfect, they were identical. Each one was exactly the same size, shape, and color, as if they had been manufactured rather than grown. "Dr. Wainwright," she managed to say, her voice barely a whisper. What is this?" "This, my dear Miss Turner, is the future of humanity," he replied, stepping into the room with fluid grace. "What you see here is the culmination of decades of research into the nature of human consciousness and the possibility of improvement." Improvement? Abigail's eyes darted to the people in the chairs. "You call this improvement?" "Oh, but it is." Dr. Wainwright's eyes gleamed with fanatic fervor. "These individuals have been freed from the burden of chaotic human emotion, from the inefficiency of individual thought. They have been perfected." As he spoke, Abigail noticed something that made her stomach lurch. The green fluid flowing through the tubes wasn't just going into the patients, it was also flowing out, carrying with it something that looked disturbingly like tiny, writhing organisms. "You're extracting something from them," she said, the horrible truth beginning to dawn on her. "Their essence, you might say. Their memories, their personalities, their very souls, all of it flowing into my collection." He gestured toward a wall lined with glass containers, each one filled with the same green fluid and labeled with a name. "I preserve what makes each person unique, while leaving behind a perfectly functional, perfectly obedient shell. But why? What could you possibly want with people's essence?" Dr. Wainwright's smile widened, and Abigail saw that behind his perfect teeth, his mouth was filled with mechanical components, gears and wires and tiny pistons that clicked and whirred as he spoke. "Because, my dear, I am not human. I am something far superior, a creation of science and ambition that has transcended the limitations of flesh and blood. But even I require sustenance. The essence of human consciousness provides the energy I need to maintain my existence and continue my work." "You're a machine," Abigail breathed, horror washing over her. "I am evolution incarnate, and soon this entire town will be perfected, just as these individuals have been. No more conflict, no more suffering, no more inefficiency, just perfect order and perfect obedience." Abigail's mind raced as she tried to process the magnitude of what she was seeing. Dr. Wainwright wasn't just a fraud or even a murderer. He was something inhuman, something that fed on human consciousness itself. "The bodies," she said suddenly. "Timothy saw you taking bodies to the cemetery." "Ah, yes. The extraction process is imperfect. Sometimes the shells are damaged beyond repair, but waste not, want not. The cemetery provides an excellent disposal site, and the good people of Harrington assume their loved ones have simply moved on." "You're insane," Abigail whispered. "I am efficient," Dr. Wainwright corrected. "And you, Miss Turner, have been most helpful in identifying the town's most observant residents. Your investigation has shown me exactly who might pose a threat to my work." The implication hit her like a physical blow. "You've been watching me." "Of course. Did you think your little nighttime meetings with young Timothy went unnoticed? Your visits to my patients, your telegrams to other cities?" Dr. Wainwright began moving toward her with predatory grace. "You have been most thorough in your research. It will make your essence particularly valuable." Abigail backed away, her mind frantically searching for an escape route. The doorway behind Dr. Wainwright was blocked, but there might be another way out through the main office. "You won't get away with this," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "People will notice when I disappear." Will they? A young woman, unmarried, with no family in town? I think you'll find that people have a remarkable capacity for forgetting inconvenient details, especially when their own consciousness has been adjusted. Dr. Wainwright lunged forward with inhuman speed, but Abigail was ready. She threw her lantern at the central apparatus, and the glass shattered against the brass components, spilling oil across the machinery. The flames caught immediately, and the green fluid began to bubble and hiss as the heat reached the glass vessels. "No!" Dr. Wainwright shrieked, his perfect composure finally cracking. "You don't understand what you're doing!" The fire spread rapidly, and the people in the chairs began to stir as the flow of green fluid was interrupted. Mrs. Blackwood's eyes fluttered, and she made a confused sound as consciousness began to return. Abigail didn't wait to see more. She ran for the main office, Dr. Wainwright's inhuman roars echoing behind her. Behind her, she could hear the machinery beginning to explode as the fire reached critical components. She burst through the front door of the building just as the first major explosion rocked the structure. Windows shattered, and green flames shot into the night sky. The sound woke the entire town, and within minutes, people were running toward the blaze with buckets and blankets. But Abigail knew it was too late to save the building, and she wasn't sure she wanted to. Whatever Dr. Wainwright had created in there needed to be destroyed completely. As the townspeople formed bucket brigades and fought the flames, Abigail searched desperately for any sign of the people who had been trapped in those chairs. To her immense relief, she saw Mrs. Blackwood stumbling out of the smoke, supported by two men. She looked confused and disoriented, but her eyes held a spark of life that had been missing for days. One by one, the other victims emerged from the burning building, all of them dazed but apparently unharmed. Little Mary Patterson ran crying into her grandmother's arms, her personality and vitality restored. But of Dr. Wainwright, there was no sign. As dawn broke over Harrington, the building was nothing but smoldering ruins. The townspeople stood in exhausted groups, trying to make sense of what had happened. The official story, hastily agreed upon by Mayor Hutchins and Dr. Morrison, was that a gas leak had caused the explosion. But Abigail knew the truth, and as she watched the smoke rise into the morning sky, she couldn't shake the feeling that Dr. Wainwright, or whatever he really was, might have escaped the flames. The nightmare was over, but she had a terrible suspicion that it might not be finished. 3 months had passed since the fire that destroyed Dr. Wainwright's practice, and Harrington was slowly returning to normal. The victims of his horrific procedures had recovered their personalities and memories, though many reported strange dreams and gaps in their recollections from their time under his influence. Abigail had written a detailed account of the events for the Harrington Herald, though she had been forced to omit the more unbelievable details about Dr. Wainwright's true nature. The official story remained that he had been a fraudulent dentist using dangerous experimental techniques, and that he had perished in the fire that consumed his practice. But Abigail knew better. Despite extensive searches through the ruins, no body had ever been found. And in the weeks following the fire, she had begun to notice disturbing signs that suggested Dr. Wainwright's influence on the town had not been completely eradicated. It started with small things. Mrs. Blackwood, despite having recovered her personality, would sometimes pause mid-conversation and stare blankly ahead for several seconds before continuing as if nothing had happened. Tom Bradley occasionally served drinks with the same mechanical precision he had displayed during his time under Wainwright's control. And little Mary Patterson, though once again the spirited child she had been, would sometimes be found standing motionless in her room, staring at the wall with that familiar vacant expression. "It's like he left something behind," Dr. Morrison confided to Abigail during one of their regular meetings. "Some kind of residue in their minds. Most of the time they're perfectly normal, but occasionally it's as if they're still connected to whatever he did to them." Abigail had been documenting these episodes, and she was beginning to see a pattern. The lapses always occurred at the same time, exactly midnight, and they lasted for precisely 13 minutes. During these episodes, the affected individuals would stand or sit motionless, their eyes unfocused, as if they were receiving some kind of signal. "Timothy," she said one evening as the boy helped her organize her notes, "I need you to do something for me. Tomorrow night, I want you to watch the people who were in Dr. Wainwright's chairs. All of them. See if they all have these episodes at the same time." Timothy nodded solemnly. At 13 now, he had grown more serious since the events at the dental practice, but he remained Abigail's most trusted ally in keeping watch over the town's strange occurrences. The next night, Timothy's report confirmed Abigail's worst fears. At exactly midnight, all 7 of Dr. Wainwright's former victims had simultaneously entered their trance-like state, standing motionless in their homes for exactly 13 minutes before returning to normal. "Miss Turner," Timothy said, his voice shaking, "there's something else. During those 13 minutes, I could swear I heard that humming sound again, the same one we used to hear from Dr. Wainwright's building." Abigail felt a chill run down her spine. Where was it coming from? That's the thing, it seemed to be coming from everywhere and nowhere at once, like it was in the air itself. That night, Abigail made a decision that would haunt her for the rest of her life. She had to know if Dr. Wainwright was somehow still alive, still exerting his influence over his former victims. And there was only one place where she might find answers. The old cemetery on the outskirts of town had always been a peaceful place, but since Dr. Wainwright's arrival, it had taken on a more sinister atmosphere. Several fresh graves had appeared in recent months, graves that the townspeople assumed belonged to travelers who had died passing through, but which Abigail suspected contained the bodies of Dr. Wainwright's failed experiments. Armed with a lantern and a shovel, she made her way to the cemetery just before midnight. If her theory was correct, and Dr. Wainwright was somehow still connected to his victims, then the connection might be strongest during their nightly episodes. As the clock tower in town chimed midnight, Abigail felt the temperature around her drop noticeably. The air itself seemed to thicken, and she could hear that familiar humming sound growing stronger. It was coming from beneath the ground. Following the sound, she made her way to a section of the cemetery where several unmarked graves lay in a perfect circle. The humming was loudest here, and as she knelt and pressed her ear to the ground, she could hear something else, the rhythmic clicking of mechanical components. With growing horror, she realized that Dr. Wainwright hadn't died in the fire. He had somehow transferred himself, or at least part of himself, into the network of bodies he had buried here. The cemetery had become a vast underground machine, with the corpses serving as components in some nightmarish apparatus that continued to function even after his supposed death. "Clever girl," came a familiar voice from behind her. Abigail spun around to find Dr. Wainwright standing among the tombstones, but he was no longer the immaculate gentleman who had arrived in Harrington months earlier. His clothes were tattered and burned, his perfect teeth now clearly visible as mechanical constructs, and his amber eyes glowed with an unnatural light. "You survived," she whispered. "Survived? My dear Miss Turner, I have transcended survival. The fire destroyed my physical form, yes, but my consciousness, my essence, that has found a new home." He gestured toward the graves around them. "Each of these bodies contains a part of me now. I'm no longer limited to a single form." The midnight episodes," Abigail said, understanding flooding through her. "You're still connected to your victims. They carry fragments of my consciousness within them. Every night, at the appointed hour, those fragments report back to me, sharing everything they have seen and heard. Through them, I monitor the entire town." Dr. Wainwright's mechanical smile widened. "Did you really think you could destroy me so easily?" "What do you want?" Abigail demanded, though she was already backing away from him. "What I have always wanted: perfection, order, the elimination of chaotic human consciousness." His form began to flicker and shift, as if he were not entirely solid. "This setback has taught me patience. I will wait and watch, and when the time is right, I will complete my work. The town will never accept you again. They know what you are. Do they? Or do they simply know what you have told them?" Dr. Wainwright's laugh was like the grinding of gears. Memories are such fragile things, Miss Turner, so easily altered, so readily forgotten. Give it time, and the people of Harrington will remember me as nothing more than a tragic figure who died trying to help them. As he spoke, Abigail became aware of movement in the shadows around the cemetery. Figures were emerging from behind tombstones and monuments, the 7 people who had been in Dr. Wainwright's chairs, all walking with the same mechanical precision, their eyes glowing with that familiar vacant expression. "You see," Dr. Wainwright said, "they come when I call. They are mine now, in ways they will never understand, and through them I will slowly, carefully extend my influence until every soul in Harrington belongs to me." Abigail ran. She crashed through the cemetery gates and sprinted toward town, her heart pounding with terror. Behind her, she could hear the mechanical footsteps of Dr. Wainwright's victims following her with relentless precision. She burst into the sheriff's office, gasping and incoherent, trying to explain what she had seen. But Sheriff Coleman, a practical man who had never fully believed her stories about Dr. Wainwright, simply assumed she'd been frightened by shadows and wild animals in the cemetery. "Miss Turner, you're clearly overwrought," he said, pouring her a glass of water. "Perhaps you should consider taking a rest from all this investigation business. The doctor is dead, the town is safe, and it's time to move on." But Abigail knew she couldn't move on. Not when Dr. Wainwright was still out there, still plotting, still controlling his victims. She spent the remaining hours until dawn, writing frantically, documenting everything she had seen and heard, creating a record that future generations might use to protect themselves. As the sun rose over Harrington, she made a difficult decision. She couldn't fight Dr. Wainwright alone, and the townspeople would never believe the full truth of what he had become. Her only option was to leave, to carry her knowledge to other towns, other cities, and warn them about the horror that might one day come to them. She packed her few belongings and boarded the morning stagecoach, leaving behind the only home she had ever known. As the coach pulled away from Harrington, she looked back to see the 7 victims of Dr. Wainwright standing in a perfect line along Main Street, watching her departure with their empty, glowing eyes. Years later, Abigail would become known as a traveling journalist who specialized in exposing medical fraud and protecting small towns from dangerous charlatans. She never married, never settled down, always moving from place to place with her collection of notes and warnings. And sometimes, in towns across Texas and beyond, she would hear rumors of a charming dentist who promised miraculous cures and perfect smiles. When she did, she would pack her bags and move on quickly, leaving behind only cryptic warnings that few people ever heeded. Because she knew that Dr. Edward Wainwright was still out there, still spreading his particular brand of perfection from town to town, and she knew that someday, somewhere, she would have to face him again. In Harrington, the people gradually forgot the details of what had happened. They remembered that there had been a dentist and that there had been a fire, but the specifics grew hazy with time. The 7 survivors of Dr. Wainwright's procedures lived normal lives, raised families, and contributed to their community. But every night at midnight, for exactly 13 minutes, they would stop whatever they were doing and stand motionless, their eyes unfocused, as if listening to a voice that only they could hear. And in the old cemetery, if anyone had been brave enough to listen, they might have heard the faint sound of mechanical humming coming from beneath the ground. The legacy of Dr. Wainwright lived on, patient and persistent, waiting for the right moment to emerge once again. And somewhere in the darkness, his perfect, terrible smile gleamed with the promise of future horrors yet to come. The town of Harrington had survived its encounter with evil, but it would never truly be free. Some nightmares, once awakened, never truly sleep again.